Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this presentation with Chordate Medical in connection with the company's report for the first quarter of 2022. The company is today represented by Weilandt, who is the CEO of the company. And my name is Alf Riple. I work at Västra Hamnen Corporate Finance, and I will be your moderator for today. We will start with a presentation by Anders, and after that we will have a Q&A session, so everybody who's listening can contribute their own questions. You can do so by writing them. There's a control on the the right side, or maybe the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're using. You can write your questions there. I will read them out, and Anders will answer. So all that remains for me to say is that this session is being recorded, and that you can find a recording later on the Chordate Medical's homepage or on Västra Hamnen Corporate Finance channel on YouTube. So with that, over to you, Anders.
Thank you very much, Alf, and welcome everybody to this Q1 report, and a little bit more than that also. So let's dive into this. I will start as usual by discussing the figures for Q1, and then cover what is new and where we stand in general in our development here. As you may have noticed, we changed the listing to Nasdaq First North, but the ticker is still the same, CMH, and that's where you can find a share. Okay, so we don't have any comparison because we only have one quarter, of course, so this is basically all the figures that I'm showing. Still on very low, almost invisible numbers of revenue, but it's looking better when we go into next and the third quarter as well. Cash flow has been higher than last year, again due to extraordinary costs for the listing process, and also some of the study activities. However, that is also of course reflected on the loss side. Earnings per share though is equivalent to last year, so that is not much to talk about here. We still have cash for the planning period, so we're looking good in that sense. A little bit about the highlights for the past 12 months. This can be repeated as many times as you want. The most important thing is that we achieved the CE mark for the chronic migraine indication a year ago. And this is something that is still in this world considered as new. This, I believe, helped us very much when we closed the warrants in Q4 last year with a subscription of 99.23%, which is extraordinary. And then we performed the change of the listing, that was done in mid-February this year. We also published that our since long now study of chronic migraine, which is a pivotal study for us, actually brought in the last patient, and we now know the program when this study can close, and I will go into details about that later. We have received the MOH approval in Saudi Arabia, that's Ministry of Health, and now also all the documentation is in place. Finally, it was a long process, but now it's done. So that is quite good for us, as we have access to the entire list of public hospitals in Saudi Arabia. A little bit more than 400 hospitals, in fact. We've also published that we are setting up a representation office, and we have employed a general manager for the Gulf area. Market access UK was a new thing a couple of months ago, which we're now working frantically on, and I will describe the details there later. And the product registration process in China is going forward in full speed, despite the fact that pretty much everybody are working from their homes or the districts they are living in. They have a very limited ability to move around in Shanghai. And also the regulatory process for potential market access to US is something we shall discuss here. But the first thing I'd like to cover is the press release that went out before lunch today, where we now display the pipeline for our studies. And first out is the 007, which is our pivotal trial for chronic migraine. The last patient came in April, end of April, and this means that the last patient will leave the last week of July. That is now a fact, and that means that as soon as that is done, we can start processing the data and prepare it for publication. And that is something that will generate a manuscript that could be submitted for publication at the end of October at the earliest. The chronic rhinitis study will deliver its clean file here in a few weeks, and then that will also be prepared for publication. Then we have two new studies that we haven't talked much about. First of all, the 009, which is a pilot study of 25-30 subjects. It's an open study that we can see the data all the time. This is quite interesting because it's focusing on the patient group that doesn't respond to the so-called CGRP treatment. That's the new thing in migraine treatment on the pharmaceutical side. A very dedicated drug, quite effective, but there is a large number of patients that don't respond to the treatment. And the problem for them is that once they get there, they really don't have any other options. It's said to be 20–30% of the group that gets the CGRP inhibitor treatments that doesn't respond. And if we can do something for that patient group, that would be extremely good for us. This is why we do this small study to, if you like, provoke other studies that could find a broader understanding on why that in that case should be so. And any good result out of this study will be fantastic for us. If it doesn't show any difference, then it only means that we are as good as the best, which is the CGRP pathway. We're looking forward to this. It's going to be exciting. It's not extremely expensive. It's also quite quick to do the study. We're doing this to build marketing tools and promotion tools, because this will gain a lot of interest in the scientific and clinical community. After that, we have the 010 study, which is an open post-market surveillance study. This is something that it's a part of our CE marking process that we went through last year. So this is basically something that we are supposed to deliver to back up the CE mark, basically. And it's quite common that this happens nowadays. I would say almost always you are obliged to do a follow-up in real clinical world. So this is going to be interesting as well. It's 200 patients, and the follow-up period is a year. And it's open, so we can use the data in sequences to actually adjust the suggestion and recommendation for a clinical regime when you treat people with the KOS technology. So that was the pipeline, and we can dive in a little bit more and repeat maybe for some of you. The migraine study. It did deliver an interim result from an interim analysis quite some time ago now for the first patients, the first 50. The entire study recruits 132 patients, that is now known. So this was a good chunk of the first patients. The results were obviously rather good, as we obtain the CE mark based on that data. Excuse me. But as we are the sponsor of the study, we have been blinded to this, so we don't know the results here. But it's quite interesting to see. And after the first patient is finished in Finland, sorry, the last patient is finished in Finland, then we will possibly take a look at that data and see what it actually said. So that was this study. And again, the last patient out end of July. Manuscript for publication possibly end of October. And then it depends on what publication we're submitting this to. They have editorial processing times that varies quite a bit before it actually gets published. But as soon as we get a clearance and okay for publication, then we can reveal the data to the public. So that is something to look forward to. Okay, so a little bit about the process that we are right now in the midst of with FDA. We have published that the first phase was concluded in the first quarter, suggesting that we should take the so-called de novo path. And de novo is a little bit like the name implies. It's something new that hasn't been registered before, but it's also for products that are less risky. So it's kind of a fast track to a market clearance without having to go the long way, which is called PMA, pre-market approval. So it's highly likely that the FDA will agree with us that this is the right choice, and this is something that we will check with FDA in a so-called pre-submission meeting that will take place during Q2. And once we get through that and hear what the FDA has to say about our ideas and plans, then we will, if that is positive, prepare a full submission of a de novo approval for somewhere during this fall. We have also said that this doesn't mean that we will enter the US as a market. That is a completely different financial decision and something that we have to stratify first. Even, of course, we have made preparations for that, but we're certainly not financed to enter the US market. But if everything looked good, that might be a place where we will go, depending on the development. UK is interesting, 48 million people, high level of known spending on migraine and headache related costs for the society and for healthcare. It is a market which is accessible and understandable and well organized. So we have obtained the services from Future Health, a small consultant group that is now working on building a case and awareness among key opinion leaders. And we will basically work through there and establish the knowledge about this technology and bring it onwards to practical clinical tests and have people talk about the results from this. So we will continue to invest in this endeavor, and we'll see later this fall. We'll be back with possibly some other news and activities that we will deploy in the market. In Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf region in general, which we now have come out of the corona situation just recently, people are able to work again, visit doctors and clinics and customers. That wasn't possible until just recently. We will now back this up by gradually establishing a small office. We already employed the general manager for this, Alan Durante, currently living in Jeddah. There is a possible move for him to Riyadh, where we think it's a better location to have our area or regional representation office. But this is quite a lengthy process to get that established. So sometimes during the fall that might happen. In the meantime, the reimbursement or compensation from insurance companies on the private side is something that is growing. And we are also establishing codes and processes in the purchasing systems for the public healthcare, something called NUPCO. We also see the similar potential for rhinitis, and then of course later on also migraine, but we will go there when we're ready. In other areas, other countries. The largest next one is the United Emirates of Arabia, or Arab Emirates. But also some of the smaller countries are quite interesting because they may be relatively quick for us to work in these areas. So we will come back, and Alan is working every day on trying to expand this. So further reports will follow. A quick repeat of what chronic migraine is. It has a prevalence of between 1.4 and 2.4% of the world population. So we usually say around 2% of the population have chronic migraine. Sorry. That is defined as having 15 days of headache per month, which is quite a lot, whereof 8 should be with migraine episodes. Then you are, from a neurological point of view, called chronic migrainer. That will represent 140 million people in the world as it stands today. Quite a large group of patients. If we just take a Swedish cost number for this, an average chronic migraine patient would cost the society about 120,000 crowns per year. 20% of that is healthcare and 80% is productivity loss because you can't be at your job. If you look at the prevalence of migraine as such, including both the chronic and the so-called episodic, when you have migraine once in a while or just below the chronic migraine level, that is in Sweden usually described as 13% of the population have this migraine condition. And it's much more common among women than men. What you can do to treat these patients today needs alternatives. There is a constant search of other tools and other ways of treating patients because the response with all these treatments are relatively low. In general, you can say that nothing works in more than 40% of the patients. There are reports about higher numbers than that, of course, but in the long run, that seems to be the case. So patients and their physicians are always looking for other alternatives or combination of alternatives. Some of these drugs are extremely expensive and some other are not so expensive, but also the effect varies quite a bit. That is for the acute therapy, starting with normal painkillers and then up to special drugs. When we talk about preventive therapies, there aren't that very many. You have the new CGRP inhibitors, which is rather expensive. An annual per patient cost is approximately 50,000–60,000 crowns per year. The Botox alternative that only works for very few, it's also quite expensive, could be about 30,000 crowns per year. And you still have to go into a clinic 4 times a year to do that. And then we have our therapy that is, of course, finding its place in that list of alternatives. This is a big thing for the society and for healthcare. The industry is quite wealthy, grows very well. The pharma side, with about approximately $9 billion in revenue per year, and a hefty growth of over 10%. The Botox alternative is 1/10 of this and doesn't grow that much. But you can see already here that this is a very important segment for the pharma industry and also for the medical device side or the medtech side. Now this is including a lot of quite advanced implantable stimulators for pain treatments, but the whole segment here is quite rich, and then that's where we belong. Our product and the technology itself, as you know, called Kinetic Oscillation Stimulation, or KOS for short, or COS. It's a very benign treatment, has no side effects really. There are some expected side effects, but nothing unusual. No adverse events in all the studies we've done. Safe, and it's also a preventive treatment that lasts quite long. It's very easy to learn. It's usually performed by a nurse after 15-20 minutes training. So that also means that the clinical cost of delivering the COS treatment is very low compared to if you would need to have a specialist involved, a physician specialist. We have covered this by 70 patents in 24 countries, and there are 3 more applications in the pipeline. The initiation of this company and the history dates back quite some time. So we are already selling the first indication, which is the same technology and the same type of treatment, but for chronic rhinitis, a stuffed nose, or nasal congestion. Also a large patient group in the world, but there is nothing today that you really can suggest to these patients, either nasal spray or some very advanced surgical procedures compared to our technology, so that the whole medicine sector is unused to have tools, which is actually a challenge for us. But once this starts to grow, which is actually, it's already growing, but if you look at the total potential for that patient group in a population, that's rather high. So this should really develop to something nice, but it will take a lot of time. A little bit about how much you actually can produce with one installation. You could perform on one shift calculation about 2,000 patients per year and machine. All these treatments are protected by electronic codes that you need in order to have the machine running. So we have protected our business case or business process by an electronic code. And here you see a little bit of the difference between these 2 indications. The chronic rhinitis patient would need 1 to 2 treatments per year, approximately. Whereas we believe that a migraine patient would need up to 6 or even more treatments per year. So it's more business per machine, if you like. And you can also see here that means that what we're talking about is not installations per se. That's nice, but what really is the business driver here is the volume, the number of repetitions or procedures that you do with each installation. That is what we're trying to go for. We go to market in 3 different ways. We have the traditional business to business, to clinic, by distributors, this is something that we are looking at. It works in some of the areas and not so much in others. So we're constantly perfecting this and finding the best way to access the market. This is also why we have deployed the market access team in the UK, because we believe this is a stronger way of going to the market. And you can also see the shift over to our own representation in the Gulf area as a sign of the same ambition, that we need to be closer to the market and work deeper, something that sometimes is not possible to do through a distributor. And the third one is the joint venture agreement we have with Analyst Medical in Shanghai, which is for us something that will be effectuated in the future once Analyst is ready with their product registration in China. They're working hard on that right now, and we published at the end of last year that this was all revamped and restarted. And of course, the pandemic situation doesn't help here, but as I said before, they are in full speed of the work that this registration process entails, and we're helping them from here in Stockholm as much as we can. So we'll see. I think they will be successful, and we will have things to report about that later in the year. So the next few steps that we're focusing on and that we will deliver, we will finalize the build-up of the proof of concept in market. So we will work towards demonstrating that we are able to sell this product in various markets. Not very large market, but the focus is actually to show that we are able to get it sold. Finalizing the migraine study, which is, again, I can't stress that enough, extremely important for us. This is something that we have full focus on. And we're also now pushing the introduction of the chronic migraine indication in the UK and volume expansion for the rhinitis arm in Saudi Arabia. The product registration in China will be valuable to us if successful, which I have all reasons in the world to believe it will. Now when we have the full attention of our partner, and they are soon going to be liberated from the devastating pandemic lockdown that they are right now experiencing in Shanghai. And we have reason to believe that the process with FDA for the US market access have the potential of being a successful story, but it remains to be seen and proven first. So with that, I'll leave it over to you, Alf. I'm done. Thank you.
And thanks to you, Anders, for the initial presentation. I would like to repeat to everybody who's listening that you can ask questions. There's a control on the right side of your screen, or maybe on the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're using. It's called questions. It could be indicated with a talk bubble. If you expand that, you can write your question, and I will post that to Anders. While we wait to get that going, I have a couple of questions myself. Maybe we could start with the financial numbers for the quarter that you just reported. In Q1, you had lower net revenues than you have had in recent quarters, and I understand that you are still in an early phase, and it's still picking up, and it can be a little bit lumpy from quarter to quarter. Is there anything in particular about this quarter that the number somewhat lower this time?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that in our most active markets, and certainly prior to the pandemic, Italy and Saudi Arabia, we still had a very notable effect from the pandemic and the impossibility that brought with it. I mean, you weren't able during Q1 to visit hospitals as a salesperson in Italy, for instance, nor could the clinics get patients in for anything that was less necessary. So I think a lot is attributed to that we were still under the paralyze that the pandemic caused. Other than that, I agree fully with you that these are so low numbers, so if they fluctuate a little bit compared to each other, it doesn't really mean anything.
Okay, thanks. And if we switch to the cost side, you had a little bit higher OPEX, especially other external expenses this time than in the previous. Is there anything in particular we should notice there?
Not really. That was the end of the quite costly process of changing the listing. Also the work up to the FDA process, a lot of consultant necessary there to prepare that. So we have done a lot of prep works that are basically investments for the future, but they are posted as costs.
I see. So maybe some of that will not be repeating in common quarters then. But also you have also decided to take on a local representative in Saudi Arabia. Now, is he employed in the company, or is it that on a consultancy basis? And in either case, will that be adding on to your costs going forward?
That is an added cost. It's not very high. And of course, that means less travel costs for us from Sweden. But certainly, yeah, there will be an increase in these costs. He is not directly employed by us, but he is employed through sort of a service company. That's the way you have to do it in Saudi Arabia. So we basically pay them to have him employed for us.
All right. Okay, I see. I was going to ask you about you explained a little bit about, or you explained quite a lot about the de novo track that you've chosen in the US, and why you chose to go that route. Now, the process itself, is it possible that it would lead to the FDA requiring you to supply or perform more clinical studies than you already have, or do you expect that the dossier and the clinical results that you have would be sufficient for an approval in the US?
From a principal standpoint, it is possible that could be a result out of this kind of process, that the FDA would require additional clinical and scientific evidence for various reasons. In our particular case, we certainly don't believe that. Our assessment and our consultant's assessment is that this should be sufficient, what we have today. But FDA is a very intelligent agency, and they have a process that is inclusive. So you will have, and we are having a rather intelligent discussion with them, and that will also materialize in one of these pre-submission meetings here, where we will learn more. But the result of that, yes, it could be that they would either have would like to take a deeper look into that material, or they like to have additional things investigated. That could happen. We don't foresee it, but it could. Yeah.
Okay. And turn to the United Kingdom, where you have employed a consultant. How do you see the process from here? I mean, from here until you are making the first sales, how long is that likely to take, do you think?
I mean, if you look at the entire historical development of these companies, it will be done very quick. But we're still talking about a reasonable amount of months. The first thing is that we are working on is to establishing a level of confidence in the technology and how it could be applied in the market. We do that mostly on the private side because that's a quicker response, but we are also include as much as we can also on the public side. A lot of these specialists are working on both sides.
Okay.
So it's quite common that you have a position at a hospital as a specialist on a neurology clinic, but you also have your own private office where you see patients routinely. So it's pretty much the same thing, but then it becomes an issue about how is this going to be reimbursed on the public side? Is there a liking from the healthcare organizations on the private side and so forth? So we're working this from the top down with very well positioned leaders in the field to get this as a recommendation for the UK Health Service, basically.
Okay. And I thought I heard you say that you could perhaps end up doing clinical tests in the UK. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So
And then
would be...
that should not be understood as clinical trials per se. Clinical tests that they start with a few patients, and we investigate together with the physician whether this is a suitable thing for his or her practice. But I also should add that yes, these two last studies I talked about, both the 009 and 010, both these will be partly run in the UK, and the 009 will be, as we published this morning, it will also be conducted and managed by King's College in London. So the entire CGRP failure study, if you like, or whatever we should call it, it's going to be run at King's College with very prominent leaders of this space in the world, actually. So yeah, that will be a UK activity.
Okay, I see. And since we're on the topic, I was going to ask you about the 009 study on well, it's patients that are not being helped by CGRP inhibitors. That's like right?
Yeah.
How did this idea come about? Was it your own idea, or did you get it from somebody else? And how did it all start?
And that is sort of homebrewed. Our chief scientific officer here, together with one of our most prominent advisors based at King's College, came up with this idea. And it was Dr. Hoffman at King's College that sort of perfected that idea, because this is a big problem. You got to realize that these patients have tried everything there is, and that is a prerequisite in order to get prescribed the CGRP inhibitor therapy. You have to have failed on 3 and sometimes I think 4 other alternatives before you get this high or expensive prescription. You also have to show that you objectively get better within 3 months on that therapy. Otherwise, they will take you off it. And this is also something that the insurance companies drives, that they only pay for you if you are successful. So if you fail, when you fall out of that therapy, it doesn't work for you, then you have tried pretty much everything there is, and you're in a black hole. So if we can do something good for these patients, I mean, we're not talking about the fantastic hit. We don't believe that. We don't even know or have an indication if we have any effect. But if we do, that means that that patient group have hopes for the future. Plus, we give an alternative for the prescribing physician to actually have a safety raft to send the patient over in and continue together. So we're basically playing only in the positive quadrant here, that any kind of success in this space would be a very good thing for us. It will also be very well known. It's remarkable. If we don't show any effect, then it means that yeah, we are just as good as the CGRP treatment. So we basically have nothing left. We have nothing to lose on it other than that will take time and some money to do it. So we think this is an eye opener. If it becomes a little bit successful, it's going to be quite a splash, actually.
And I assume that it must reflect some credibility on yourselves, also that King's College is doing this.
Yeah, we have good support from King's College, and they are quite well positioned in the world of headache medicine in the world. So that is a prominent school and a prominent clinic also. So it's a very good collaboration where we get a lot of good support from.
Thanks. I just want to remind the listeners that there is time for a question if you have one. We're nearing the end of the session, but if you're a quick typer, you can add a final question for Anders. Otherwise, my final question is about the other, or the final study on your timeline, and that's a pretty big study with 200 patients, and I think you said 15 clinics in 4 countries. A big study is usually, in my parlance, means an expensive study. So I was wondering, how will this be financed?
It's basically budgeted since long. So in normal numbers, yes, such a study would be expensive. Now this is regular routine clinic. So there is no randomization, there is no placebo control. There are for sure monitors that needs to monitor the study, but it's basically collecting real life data. And that is not anywhere near as expensive to do a clinical study. So what we're doing here, under the same type of ethics, though, that still needs to be applied, that we're collecting data from regular clinical practice, basically.
Oh, I see. So there wouldn't be a question of patient insurance or paying patients to participate or anything like that.
You would actually have to put up an insurance, but that's not detrimental because of the low risk level of that kind of situation, and we don't have patients that get placebo that want other alternative treatments afterwards and so forth. So there is a lot less cost involved in that kind of stuff.
Is it possible to magnify what the cost will be?
Yeah, but that's nothing we publish, but it will be reported once we start to actually book these costs, because they will show up. So we will be quite open about that at a later stage, but we'll have to run for at least a year before we do it, I guess.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions for you today, Anders, but I think we'll both meet again and can discuss more in just over a week and a half, when you will attend our seminar in Malmö. So for those of you who are listening and who haven't already, if you go into Västra Hamnen's homepage, there is a page there where you can sign up for our seminar, where not only Chordate but also 5 other companies will be presenting. It's on the 9th of June. You can see Anders again and see me again and see lots of interesting things. So if you haven't,
live or on the screen.
Exactly. Great. Thanks very much, Anders.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.